Hello and welcome to Valiant Growth. Today I'm interviewing Nick Hazelton. You might know him from episode 21, and we've got his full story in that one, which you can find at valiantgrowth.com/e21. The short version is he runs his own podcast, the Anarcho-Yakitalism podcast, and he also runs his own farm raising yaks and hogs, both of which he has started at the age of 15. And I brought him on today to talk about Stoicism. Stoicism is something that seems to be gaining popularity lately. It is a philosophy, an outlook on life, and I've seen more and more people that I like to listen to and whom I admire talk about it. So I said I'll invite Nick and have him introduce it to me and to you, because it is a field that I am not particularly familiar with. And we had a great talk on the subject, and by the end we also talked about psychostoicism, how certain psychological principles can help improve and alleviate certain aspects of stoicism. Have fun! Hi, Nick, and welcome to Valiant Growth.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be back, Philip.
Yeah, you're holding the record for most interviews. You're the first return guest.
It's an honor.
Yeah, maybe you'll keep holding it. Who knows?
I'll try. Maybe I'll try.
Right. I brought you here today on the show to talk about Stoicism, and I brought you specifically because I know that this is an area of interest for you. This is something that you like to talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to give my own background, I'm only vaguely familiar with the philosophy, but I know some of the ideas and it sparked my interest. And, well, basically, the goal of today's conversation is to see if this can be, I'm reversing it, so to see what it is, and B, to see if it helps with personal development, and if so, how it can be applied.
Yeah, sure. I think it has some. I think for me, it contributed to my personal development. I think in a lot of ways, and yeah, I think that it definitely can, and hopefully I can make the case for that today.
Cool. So, what is Stoicism? Like, you have 130 characters? No, I'm joking.
Yeah, so Stoicism is a philosophy that I think originated in the Hellenistic age of the Greek history period, I guess. Coming from Athens, it stemmed from a school of thought called Cynicism, which many people will recognize the word cynic in English, right? We use that to mean somebody who looks at the world kind of in a negative way, thinking that things aren't going in a positive direction. But that's not what the school of thought was really talking about. It was preaching the idea that we should live accordance with nature or fate, not nature as in running around in the woods, though some cynics probably would advocate for that too, because they advocate for a very simple lifestyle. So the idea was minimalism, living in accordance with fate, which we can explain a little bit later, and just trying to be at inner peace, valuing virtue over anything else, sacrificing materialism especially. And so Stoicism stemmed from that. I can't remember who it was. I believe it was, I want to say Zeno, but it was a Zeno, I think. But I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm forgetting. But they started this, they studied under one of these Cynic philosophers, and they decided that cynicism was a little too extreme. They didn't want to live in bathtubs in the streets stealing food so that they could live, because that's what some of the famous cynics did, like Diogenes. There are some very outlandish stories of him spitting at people, stealing pies from windowsills, and acting like a dog, just because he thought that it was. So I don't remember exactly what the story was, but it's kind of extreme. So they didn't want to take it that far. And the idea behind Stoicism was just to hold a lot of those ideas, that virtue over all, right? Living in accordance with nature or fate, and focusing on your sphere of control. And then I would also throw in there some other practices that I think we'll get into. I think there are kind of four main things to Stoicism that are important, but the idea of the philosophy is to live in accordance with fate and to stick to your virtuous code.
Right. Is that the guy with the barrel who lived in the barrel? I know
Diogenes?
Yeah, I know that story. So he lived in a barrel, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
And before we move on, how did stealing stuff go with living with virtue? How did that work?
That's a very interesting question. I'm not totally sure, but I do believe that he took food when it was left in a place where it was accessible to him, and that may have been, breaching people's property rights. I don't know exactly. I'm not big on cynicism. Mm-hmm. I think it's an interesting study, but I haven't done a whole lot of research, and I've just seen a few little things. But I believe that's something he did, and I'm very open to have people tell me that that's not true. But I do believe that he took stuff, and I don't know how it fit in with the philosophy exactly.
Right. Yeah. It just stood out to me. And
sure.
Yeah. So when you say living in accordance with fate, is that FATE or FAITH?
FATE.
Right.
So
what does that mean?
The idea is to, I guess, basically take things as they come, roll with the flow. It's kind of a Zen idea, where we recognize that we don't control everything that's going to happen, so that we're going to roll with it. So the best example is to say, well, we know that the sun is going to rise, so we're not going to live as if it isn't. We know that the sun is going to rise, so that's the way we're going to live. We're going to live in accordance with fate, accordance with what's going to happen next. And when we don't know what's going to happen next, we take it as it comes. So we don't know necessarily if there's a storm going to brew, and come in tomorrow, even though now we kind of do, right? But say we didn't, we're not going to live as if that storm didn't happen, and we're not going to curse it. We're not going to be upset that the storm is coming. We're not going to be upset that the sun rose or that it's going to rain, because that doesn't help us, right? We're going to live in accordance to what is happening now, and we're not going to let it negatively affect us.
Right. And so I guess all philosophies come as a reaction to what is going on. It's kind of a contradiction. Like, we have the better way. So how do people, I wanted to ask how did people, but as we're not all Stoics at this point, I will ask in the present as well. How do people not live in accordance with fate? What does that mean? What's the practical manifestation of that?
I think a lot of people will react to situations that they can't control in a inefficient way, either by worrying too much about what's going to happen, worrying about things that they can't control specifically. So, worrying about this is a very natural thing, and just comes into mind randomly, is that worrying that when your kid is going to come home after they've been out late. That's something that a lot of people would worry about, and I would say that that's very natural. right? Worrying about your children is very natural, but you can't control necessarily when that happens. You can do some things like try to call them and say, hey, when are you coming home? But if you can't and you're worrying, that's not actually helping you out very much. And it's a very hard thing to understand. So maybe this isn't the best example, but that's the first thing that came to my mind. And then I would also say that I guess a better example might be is that people expect things to go their way. Like I expect my yaks to stay in their field, and they don't do that. So when a yak gets out, I have, and sometimes I still do, I get upset because I know I have to go get them. But what I need to understand, or what I don't need, but what I like to remember is that I don't really control what that yak does necessarily. I can make some I can make some actions and take some actions to inhibit his power to get out, right? I can build taller fences, but I don't necessarily control exactly what he does. And so when animals do things that I don't want them to do, it does not help me, and it's not efficient to worry about it or be upset. So that would be that's what I would say. People aren't living in accordance to fate if they're getting upset over actions that they don't control.
Right. And I think I get this one, but I want to clarify for the listeners. There is a border between fate. Like, fate is the things you can't influence, but it's not a blind submission, right, to whatever happens to you. So you build the fence taller, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. It's not saying that, oh, the yaks are going to get out anyway, I'm not going to build a fence, right? It's going to, the idea is let's be as efficient as we can to meet our goals. That's my mind. And that may not be exactly Stoicism, but that's the way I like to use it, is use these powers of understanding what I do control to make actions to most efficiently meet my goals and values or whatever. So I'm not gonna, just because the yak is, he might get out because I don't have a fence built. I'm not going to say, well, I'm just going to let him get out. I'm going to say, well, I'm going to do the best in my power to keep him from doing it. But when he does it, I'm not going to be upset about it because I don't really need to be upset about it. It's just something that's going to happen, and I'm going to expect that because if it does happen, then I was right and I was prepared, either emotionally, or I was prepared by having a four-wheeler or an ATV or something prepared to go get him. Or and if I'm wrong, then hey, that's great. He didn't get out. Right, so that's what I would say is the idea. It's not submitting to fate necessarily. It's not. I guess it's not giving up on trying to meet your goals, your preferences. It's just recognizing that our preferences aren't always met and that we should be prepared.
Right, and do you think? I'm kind of curious in your experience. Do you think adopting Stoicism can have a negative effect insofar as you... I don't know how to phrase it. Just give me a second here. So there are people who say everything that happens in my life is my responsibility and is a consequence of what I do and did in the past. So they will perhaps have more motivation to control everything, and of course that's an extreme that doesn't work. But do you think that adopting Stoicism perhaps might take the wind out of their sails?
Oh, that's interesting, and I suppose it could if used in a certain way, right? I think that Stoicism is a tool, just like many other things. That I guess maybe not Stoicism itself is a tool. It's an idea, right? But the practices it holds are tools, right? And I think that they could be used in effective ways, right? Not meeting our goals. In my experience, I don't think I've faced a lot of losing wind. in some ways, I think that I have lost some of my motivation factors, right? When I started trying to get out of school, I was very motivated by my emotions, right? I wanted to be free. I wanted to get out and do my own thing instead of being stuck in a classroom. So I pushed very hard for emotional reasons and tried my best to get out. And I was very upset that sometimes my way did not go. And that motivated me to keep trying, right? I occasionally got beat down about it and I got, upset and I gave up a little bit. But then I'd come back and keep going because I cared so much. And what I've found now is that I don't have those same motivations, because after I got out of school, I was still very emotional about succeeding. I wanted to succeed in my business. And now I've kind of taken the approach that, I don't necessarily need to succeed to be happy. And that's fine. I'm not caring as much about what other people think about my success. I'm more caring about myself, things that I can control. So I've lost some of the motivation, and I will say that I'm not as driven, but at the same time, I don't get beat down nearly as much as I used to, I think. So I think it comes at a little bit of a cost, but I think the benefit definitely outweighs it. I do think that people could lose some of the motivational factors depending on where you're getting your motivation. But I also think that the lows of what that strategy does, with your strategies of being upset, using these emotional, I'm trying to explain this. Sorry. I think that using these strategies of using emotional, motivational factors can bring a lot of distress. And right. I think that practicing Stoicism can take away from that distress.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So we could say perhaps that it might reduce the cyclicality in one's motivation to some extent.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty good trade-off. Like, I think cyclicality is natural in many ways, but if you can cut down on the extremes, that's pretty good. I don't know. I'm curious about your experience, Nick, but the way I understand, wow, I'm just having a hard time today pronouncing words. The way I understand the world and the way I see successful people and how successful enterprises are built, I see that consistency is often much more important than moments of brilliance. So if you can avoid completely breaking down more often, even if it cuts your peak performances down a little bit, I think overall that, and in the long term, that might contribute significantly to getting more of your goals met.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Right. So one of my favorite ideas in Stoicism is the spheres of control. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. It's really part of living in accordance with fate, right? And this is where this idea of focusing on your sphere of control really matters. Like I was talking about earlier, we don't fear the sun rising because we know it's going to rise. So we focus on what we can control, and then and there's obviously some we can get into what do you really control, but I think one thing that most people will agree, and I'm sure there are people that do disagree, is that you can control your actions. And there aren't too many other things that you can control. You have some spheres of influence, right? You can influence certain things, but the main thing that you do control are your actions. And sometimes it feels like it isn't, and I totally understand that feeling like you can't control some of your habits. But I would say that the main thing that you should focus on is trying to control your actions, and there are certain ways to do that, I think, by practicing good habits. And it's very difficult. It's a difficult thing. But I think that would be really the only thing that you really do control, is you control yourself, your actions, how you react. You don't necessarily control your feelings, I don't think, but you definitely have an influence over them by how you react to things. I think that you can control that in a few ways. But so the idea is to focus on that sphere of control, and and we can argue what that is, and I'm arguing that it's your actions and your reactions. So the idea is, if you focus on things that you don't control, you're not really going to get anywhere because you don't control them. And sometimes you can use your spheres of influence to get what you want, and sometimes you have enough influence to maintain some very regular results, right? Some very effective results. But there is no real guarantee that you're going to get those consistent results if you don't control something. And the further away you get out of your sphere of influence, the harder it is. And like I was saying, you have to realize that you don't control everything. And then when you realize that and you focus on what you do control, you don't waste as much time worrying and working on things that you may not get the results that you want out of. If that makes sense. I hope that I'm not rambling in a weird way. I felt like I didn't explain that very well.
No, I think you did, and hence that's the efficiency part, right? That's where, because you say it's a very efficient philosophy, or that's what it leads to. I guess that's one of the main reasons, right?
Yes.
Are you familiar with Nathaniel Branden's work?
A little bit. I wish I was a little bit more familiar, but I haven't read the books, but I've listened to an analysis of the 6 pillars of self-esteem, and I really enjoyed that from the School Sucks podcast.
Right. Yeah, I address it on the show. I brought it up occasionally. I don't think I've done an in-depth look into that, but I will say that I have read the books, and they have influenced me powerfully. And basically my whole framework of thinking on self-esteem comes from him. And yeah, the reason why I'm bringing him up is because one of the things he says, and it's one of the principal foundations of self-esteem, is not building it on external factors that you don't have control over. So things like anything really, like if your self-esteem is conditional on your salary or your business's success or your romantic success or anything that's outside of you and is not within your direct control, you are basing your whole self-esteem on very fragile foundations. I think he would even argue that you can't even say it's self-esteem because it's an inner appreciation. I think this connects very much with what you were saying.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and that was one of my favorite things when listening to that analysis of 6 pillars of self-esteem, and that's why I think it's a very valuable idea, and that's why I'm very interested in it. And it's unfortunate I haven't read the book or done much research, but yeah, I think that fits in exactly with Stoicism. That because the idea with Stoicism is that your I guess self-esteem, if you want to call it that, or your self-worth, should be determined by your action. By what matters to you and how, and the things that you control, right? Which are your actions, your reactions, and the way that you hold to your virtue. And I think that some Stoics will have some ideas and give some ideas of what that virtue is. And I think that I would disagree with many of them because some of them had some other ethical ideas than I have, and very different political ideas. People ranging from socialists to imperialists have been Stoics. But the idea is to live in accordance to your virtue, and that's where you should deem your self-worth according to Stoicism.
Right, I see. That's interesting. So it doesn't have a unified definition of of ethics then, of morality. It just says it's important.
Yeah, that would be what I have taken from it. I there's some very there's a lot of more deeper things about Stoicism that I don't understand. I'm more focused on the ethics of Stoicism, and that being the ethical practices, like what we're talking about today. And there's a lot more to the philosophy in regards to deeper philosophy like logic and metaphysical foundations, right? That they go into that I don't share. It's a very old philosophy, so they have some ideas that don't really fit our modern scientific ideas of the world and the universe and reality. So I don't know if there is much on specific virtuous actions, but I do think that a lot of the Stoic philosophers have talked about their own ideas of what is virtuous. And I would say that I don't agree with all of them. And I don't think that it's necessary to hold those ideas to be a Stoic.
Right. So this is a good opportunity that I can learn something today. So you said that you focus on the ethics, but in my mind, in my understanding, ethics does deals with morality and what is good and what is evil in a moral sense. Am I incorrect? Perhaps I might be.
Oh, you're absolutely right, and you're right there. And if you're, I don't, are you asking? Like, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase, but are you leading into something?
No, it's this genuine question because I know you. Yeah, I think you studied philosophy more there, so I'm a little bit. I don't understand when you mean that you focus on the ethics.
Sure, yeah, no, that makes sense. I understand now. No, yeah, that is kind of a I didn't explain that correctly, I don't think. I guess I've studied more of the practices of Stoicism, and the tools that they use to meet their virtuous ends, more so than I have studied virtue and in the ideas of Stoics. So I know that some Stoic philosophers have had ideas of what virtue is, but I'm not sure if that is agreed upon by all Stoics. And I definitely disagree with a lot of the philosophers on their ideas of morality. But what I definitely agree with them is on that premise of let's live in accordance with fate. So there could be more to the philosophy that I don't fully understand. It's kind of a complex thing when you get deeper, but I don't think that it's necessary to have the same ideas of what virtue is to be a practicing Stoic. And I think that the practices of Stoicism can benefit you no matter what your idea of virtue or morality is.
Right, yeah, and that's great because Valiant Growth is all about actionable. So let's go there. What are the practices of Stoicism?
Yeah, so I think that there are kind of four main ones, and they kind of play off of each other in a way. But the main ones that I focus on, and then there could be more that I don't hear about because I'm very versed in taking what I know from Stoicism, which is, I think, a lot. It's much more than most people, but I do want to say that there are a lot more people with more expertise than I have. But the four ones that I take the most, and the only ones that I remember, and I haven't studied a lot, I've just been practicing for the last few months. But the four ones that I focus on are what we've been talking about, living in accordance with fate, not trying to fight what is happening. And the idea of focusing on your sphere of control are kind of the same thing, but I like to differentiate them just to have that focus on that sphere of control, focusing on what you can control and only that as much as you can. Of course, I don't think that's really possible. We do have our spheres of influence, and it's very important to to recognize those and to still work within those. And sometimes we do have to meet our preferences and our goals. Sometimes we do have to deal with things that aren't under our control. So, but it's appropriate and very useful to remember that our actions and our reactions are what we control the most out of anything, and anything else we do have to understand could go in a way that we do not prefer. And I think one way to really prepare for that is this next practice, which is negative visualization. This is a real meditative thing. I think that you can find some ways to meditate on your sphere of control and to come up with strategies to focus on your sphere of control and to live in accordance with fate. And I think there are many strategies that maybe we can get into. But I think this negative visualization is a real strategy and a really great practice that I think is very important in preparing for when things don't go our preferred way. And the idea is that you think of what might happen in whatever's next. You can choose anything. This can range from thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow or thinking about what happens if blank happens, right? So something as extreme as losing your job or having a family member die, or as little as stubbing your toe or losing a penny. What are you going to do in these situations? And the idea with negative visualization is to look at those situations and plan for the worst. Think about the worst thing that could possibly happen, and then think about what are you going to do to react to that? What is going to be your reaction? And just expect things to go wrong as you move on then. So you visualize what's going to happen, think about what's going to go wrong, and then expect that thing to go wrong when it's happening. So the idea is that when that does happen and when it goes wrong, that you are prepared. And then if it goes right, then hey, it's a pleasant surprise and it went right. So awesome. But expecting that it is going to go wrong will have will prepare you emotionally, as well as if you took the proper strategies to prepare for that situation, you will also be prepared in other senses, right? So to use the example of losing your job, you practice in your head to be emotionally prepared, right? That when your boss comes and tells you, okay, we have to let you go, Nick or Philip, you know how to react to that. You're not going to do things that further damage your relationship or move against your goals, or you're going to act in your own virtue, right? And then so that's the emotional preparation. You also kind of have to prepare for, okay, I lost my job, and there might be some despair in that. You lost something that's maybe important to you, or now you have to adapt to a situation that you're not used to. But the idea is, so now you're emotionally prepared, and then now, since you did prepare for that emotionally and you had that practice of visualizing it negatively, now that if you prepare ahead of time, then you can prepare for the worst situations, which is now you don't have an income stream, right? So if you're properly preparing for what's going to happen next, you should have some money saved. You should have a backup plan. You should have your resume prepared so you can go get a new job, or you should have some things underway so that you can have a little bit more income as you try to find a new job or you choose your new path. So does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And then the final and practice that I like to bring up is the obstacle is the way. Taking this mindset that challenges are a good thing, and that life is full of challenges, and more often than not, you're faced with certain challenges, from very small things to little things, or to larger things. And this kind of plays into all of the rest of it, right? This all is very connected, I think. So when we lose our job, we take that as a challenge. Instead of thinking, oh no, poor me, what am I going to do? This is terrible. You think, well, what really am I going to do? How am I going to get over this? And let's take this as a challenge, because That's really what it is, right? We're going to get back on our feet somehow. At least that's what we want. So let's find a way to do that instead of being bummed out about it. Take some actions and work on this challenge because that's what it is, and that's what you should take it as. Because otherwise, if it's not a challenge, then it's an obstacle that you can't get over. But really, the idea is with Stoicism is the obstacle is the way. Get over that obstacle, because what else are you going to do? I guess, right? So that those would be those four things: living in accordance with fate, practicing, understanding your sphere of control and focusing on your sphere of control, and then visualizing what could go wrong, preparing for what could go wrong, and then facing what's going wrong as a challenge and as something that you can and will overcome, or at least try to overcome with the best of your ability.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they seem very valuable practices to me, and I would say I think aspects of Stoicism have seeped into mainstream culture as well, and I have heard some of these perspectives or practices from people who I probably don't even know, haven't even heard of Stoicism. And I think these are they've become popular because they are useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember who I was talking to. It might have been Jim Cunningham, or it could have been Bill Buford. I believe it was Bill Buford. He's the one who introduced me to Stoicism. Him and Brett Venato of the School Sucks Project did a pretty good series on Stoicism. But they introduced me there, and I was talking to Bill Buford, and we're talking about these things, and we're like, I'm like, well, these things seem kind of obvious, right? This is pretty common sense. These are, and a lot of people get this, even though that they aren't Stoics, like you said, Philip. And he's like, well, yeah, because I really think that Stoicism is the no duh philosophy, and I really like that phrase there. It's the no duh philosophy. It's like, oh, of course. And I think these are things that you can kind of realize just by living your life and experiencing things, and realizing that if you have any kind of little bit of wisdom, these things can be pretty apparent, right? But I think that a lot of time we can miss some of these common sense ideas, and I think that spelling it out in these practices and having these kind of laid out in a way like Stoicism does can be very valuable to try to remember these things, because it can be very hard. I still have some difficulties focusing on my sphere of control and living in accordance with fate, right?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that too. But I just want to say that I think actually I really like the Noda Principle, and I would extend it even further, and I will say that all useful philosophy should meet this criteria. If it's good, it's usually Noda. Is it Noda? Sorry, is that the correct?
It is. Yes.
It is Noda. Like, for instance, the scientific method is pretty common sense, but by writing it down, by focusing on it, by exploring further, we gain some true value there, starting from the common sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect example.
Right. And yeah, my listeners and myself included, we're all very interested in the actionable when it comes to philosophy and everything else. So I recommend using the Noda Principle whenever faced with something obscure. Also, something that popped into my mind when you were talking about negative visual. Oh man. I'll leave it in. This is the stuff that gets edited out when I do a solo show.
Sure.
Right. When focusing on negative visualization.
Yeah, you had it that time. It's close. It's close. It's a hard word to say. It's weird.
Yeah, visualization. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I've never heard mentioned, but I think that's the big benefit of it, is also considering in really looking at the risks that you're taking in your life, you might come to the conclusion, not only will you form a contingency plan, but with some things you might come to the realization of, do I want to have this risk in my life? Now that I realize how devastating it can be, and I experience small scale contained versions of the emotions that I will feel if it does, maybe you will say that this is something that I don't want to have in my life, and perhaps I can alter it. So your example was having your boss come come to your desk and tell you that you're fired. Well, if you do the negative visualization, your conclusion might be, okay, how do I prepare for this? But your conclusion might also be, do I want to be this dependent on someone and have this level of risk in my life? What alternatives are there out there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And I didn't think about that when I was explaining that. But yeah, that's exactly what it can and should be used for, is mitigating risks. Deciding, is this, can I avoid this situation somehow? And finding a way to do that is definitely a good way to use negative visualization. See, I can't even say it.
Yes. Now my self-esteem is restored.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's it's a very, very useful strategy.
Yeah, and I think you beat me to it when it comes to the job part. People listening to just this episode without having listened to our previous talk will not know what we're talking about, but essentially you started being entrepreneurial at 15.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have a job, right? I'm concurrent.
Yeah, right now I don't have any job. I'm working for myself.
Do you think there will be a time in your life when a boss will be able to come into your office and tell you that you're fired?
I doubt I'll work in an office. I'm always open to anything happening. I think that's another Stoic principle, is not making promises about the future. Right. I would like to think that it won't happen, but I would say that it's possible that I could have to find or choose to find a job, either part-time or full-time, to be able to make a little bit more money. And that's something that I'm actually considering now. Is I don't have a large cash flow. It's very small. Definitely not enough to live off of. So I'm 17, so I can stay in my parents' house for a little while longer. But it's kind of going off on a subject. But no, I would say that it is possible. But I would like to limit that possibility as much as I can.
It makes sense to me, and you might have to do that. It's what I'm doing right now. I have a part-time job, and I'm trying to move into full-time entrepreneurship and with the podcast and other things. But yeah, my guess is, though, I will say this is not a commitment on your part, but my guess is that you're not going to be in that situation. Or if you are, you're not going to be, even without Stoicism, you're not going to be devastated.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And that's what's cool about being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely.
So getting back to Stoicism, tell my listeners about what impact this has had on your life.
Sure. So I kind of came to Stoicism through the School Sucks project, and immediately I found some great relief, because at the time I was dealing with some grief of losing somebody very close to me, and that devastated me quite a bit. But through adopting Stoicism and studying Stoicism, I found, okay, this was not a situation I could control. There were some things I feel like I could have done better with this in the relationship I had with this person, but that's not something I could control now. And what I can control is the way I learn from this experience. And it doesn't necessarily have to be negative. though it's very natural to go through these grieving processes and be upset, right? Realizing that this is temporary, and that I will eventually be able to move on with some greater knowledge, right? That was probably the event that sparked a lot of my um, that's what set me on my path to where I am today in a lot of ways in regards to self growth, right? Being able to sit back on a situation and be able to reflect on what my actions were and what I could have done better, right? Using, instead of beating myself up and feeling really bad about the situation, instead looking at it as a learning opportunity, and to realize that mistakes are made, and that they really are fine as long as you don't keep making them and as long as you learn from them. So that would be the main thing that I would say I got out of it, and I really contribute that philosophy to the way I overcame some of my issues with depression, and just not being fully satisfied with the path I was on. It was at a young age, right? But still, using these tools helped then, and it's been helping me now. I found that I'm having some trouble focusing on them as more and more things and more ideas are introduced to me. It's hard to keep track of them, but I found that when I do practice these Stoic practices, there's a lot of inner peace, right? I'm not worried about things that I can't control. And that relieves a lot of stress, and that allows me to focus on what I can control, things that are actionable, for me to get to the goals that I want. Things that I can set some very good goals and some very effective plans. So I found that the inner peace that Stoicism brings is very valuable, and I think that many people could find the same value as well.
Are there what's the best approach, do you think, to adopting Stoicism? Keeping it in the actionable sphere, could knowing these practices and these principles be enough just from having listened to this and thinking more about them and going on with your life? Or are there books and resources that can make it even more effective?
I think there are, and I've unfortunately, I think this is part of why I have some troubles remembering them, is that I don't do enough research and I don't stay current on reading up on this. And I was a part of a Facebook group, so I watched a lot of people come to the group with some of their struggles, and then I got to see the advice that people would give them. So that was very easy to keep those fresh in my mind as I saw those go through my Facebook news feed. But as I joined more groups and I had more friends and more things went through my news feed, it became much more sparse, and I didn't get to see that Stoic talk, right? Talked about it as often. So what I would encourage people, and this is something that I want to try to do, is to set a routine of meditating on these ideas, just thinking about what is in my sphere of control, where might I be focusing on things that aren't in my sphere of control, where could I move my focus to be able to be more effective in reaching my goals and meeting my preferences. I think that there are ways to write that down and make that more clear for yourself. Like, I would encourage people to write down their priorities and their goals, right? I think that's a big thing that anybody really promotes, right? I think you're working on getting things done, right? And
yes,
adopting those practices. And I think part of that is setting goals, right? And writing them down. I'm not I haven't studied getting things done enough either, but that's kind of the idea, right? Part of it, at least.
Actually, I would say it's not a major part of getting things done. That's not true, but it's not the
It's not the focus.
It's not the focus. Yeah, I think getting things done is where it's most impactful is on getting things done, like the focusing on getting things done day to day and having a clear mind. It does have, and it does talk about horizons of focus, but I would say it's not the best resource on that specific. Not because it's wrong, but because it's not a central focus.
Sure. Yeah, but so the idea is that you're working towards these goals, right? And then you have some practices to get there. So that's what I would encourage people to do with Stoicism is focus on the practices, and this is something that I'm going to do, and I'm starting to do again, is to work on just spending some time each day meditating, keeping a track of some things that you may not be that you might not prefer in your life. If you'd like things to go a different way, thinking about those things, and then just using these strategies of focusing on your sphere of control to do that. And then if you get beat down, try to remember that, hey, the obstacle is the way, and that you're facing a challenge right now, and that's fine, and that you're going to be able to overcome it. And if you don't, then you negatively visualize about what's going to happen if you don't, and you prepare for the worst, right? But I do think that it's kind of hard to remember these things without spending a lot of time on them, and that's an issue that I have, and I'm trying to find ways to overcome. So I'm still kind of dealing with those strategies. But one thing that I think part of the strategy will be, and this is what my grandfather has suggested to me, and he's had some success, is to I can't remember if he's writing things down or if he's reading a thing every day, but I believe that he took a book by Epictetus, who was a big Stoic philosopher. I don't remember what the book is called off the top of my head, but I think it's the most popular book by Epictetus. But it's very short little pages on just little things in life that he came up with, little things he thought about, and he wrote them down. And then there is also a good book that he suggested to me also was The Art of Joyful Living, or The Art of Stoic... Oh, shoot. I forgot what it's called, but it's by William Irvine, and it's something like it's Joyful Living, The Art of Stoic Joy, or something like that. I don't remember. I apologize, but I'll get you the link, Philip, and I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I will do that. Actually, I'm thinking I will put it under. So if those of you don't like going to the notes, I will put it under Valiant Growth / Nick Stoicism book. That's where you will find it.
Okay.
I could move on to my criticism of Stoicism, and we could talk about that.
Let's go for it.
Okay, let's go for it. So, yeah, I have two angles to this, and the first angle is kind of an intellectual one, and the psychological one, and the other angle, which I've kind of discovered today as I was thinking about this upcoming conversation, is connected to my own history. So yeah, I think I'll begin with my own history because that might be a little bit more interesting and more personal, if that's okay with you, Nick.
Yeah, sure.
So I've only recently heard the philosophy of Stoicism discussed, and perhaps I think even the word itself, I haven't really heard the word used very much before, up to recently. But I believe that my family and myself did we did use many principles of Stoicism in our day-to-day life. And because I wanted to tell you before, I was thinking what I'm going to talk about here, and I wanted to tell you that I discovered it on my own, and I used some of the techniques independently, but then I realized that it came through my family. So the idea of focusing on what is within your sphere of control was a big one in my family. But the problem was, and the kind of environment that this created, I'm sure that there are many ways of using Stoicism, and there are many branches. So everybody has an interpretation. But the way this manifested in my family was that so someone would come with a problem, right? And the other person would say, "You're not rational. Here are the things that you can control. Here are the things that you can't control. So focus on the things that you can control." And that's it. And there was no empathy in that. There was no emotional connection. And I personally believe that it was used as a means of limiting connection between the members of family. I'm not consciously, but that was why it happened. And it really led to this environment where we're not super logical all the time, right? And sometimes we need an understanding or some empathy, and that just wasn't present. There was no point in bringing it up, because you would get this answer and you would get no empathy. And I think some of the Stoics can be blamed of this. And I think I heard it in one of your conversations on it, that you will have people, like in that forum, for instance, or in that group, you would have people react like this. And I would say that is not particularly helpful, because sometimes we just need empathy, and we already know that it's not within our control, but we would like someone to connect with us on a human level and give us a validation that what we're experiencing is a normal reaction, and then we can move on to solve the issue. What would you say to that, Nick?
I think that's a very valuable and real concern, and I definitely share that with Stoicism, and I've I guess it's suppression, right? Suppression of these feelings. That can be something that Stoics do, and I think that's something that I've done. And being young, I don't have very many habits formed, but one of those is suppression of so-called negative feelings, right? Like things like sadness and frustration and anger. That's something that I experienced in trying to suppress, and I found that I'm not very good at empathizing with others or even myself. It's something that I've come to in the last few months, and it's something that I definitely work on, and I try to be more empathetic towards people and myself. But it's something it's very hard, and I think that's partly because of how I was raised as well. The way I adapted to my environments was to try to be very reasonable, try to be very, not reasonable necessarily, but very rational and logical, only focusing on principles rather than some emotions, right? And you're right, I don't think it's very helpful. And I think that people who suppress these emotions and don't, practice self-empathy and don't empathize with others, damage their relationships with others and also themselves. And, it's kind of using strategies to kind of shame yourself. Like, how dare you feel good? Or, how dare you feel bad? There are many people in this world who have more struggles than you have. And their life is much worse. So how dare you not feel grateful for what you have, and how dare you feel bad, right? Those strategies are not very effective and won't garner you very great results, I think. I think that they can be effective in temporarily maintaining control and some emotional balance, but I think it often will those issues will come again, and it'll be worse the more that you suppress these emotions, right? So I think that that's something that people can make a mistake with when practicing Stoicism. The idea is not to squash or get rid of these so-called negative emotions, because I don't think that this is another piece of this is another tool that I bring into this. This is part of nonviolent communication strategies and ideas, is that, and maybe it's not specifically, but this is the way I learned this from Daryl Becker. The way I learned how to practice some of these ideas with nonviolent communication is to not view emotions as negative. So when you're sad, you understand that you are missing some sort of value or desire. Something's not being met. Something is not quite to your satisfaction, either in a very apparent level or on some subconscious level. And realizing that is why you have an emotion. That's why you're feeling, not necessarily because you have the wrong outlook on it, right? Which is kind of, I think, the idea of when you try to shame yourself or you try to convince yourself that this is not an issue or whatever it is. When you suppress things, I think that you're kind of telling yourself that the strategy or the way you're thinking of things is really bad for you, right? And that it's the reason why you feel bad is because of your outlook on life, not necessarily because something happened to you. Right? Does that make sense? Do you feel like that you're understanding that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head with suppression.
Yeah. So I think that part of what you should do with Stoicism is recognize that you will have these emotions like sadness and frustration that many people in the world and I don't know, maybe not especially, but especially in the culture that I was raised in, that people would consider negative and things to avoid. And in some ways, I do think there are things to avoid, right? You want to meet all of your needs and preferences and, whatever it is. But realizing that, I think this is part of Stoicism, right? Realizing that things will go wrong and that you will feel bad every once in a while. And just recognizing that that's something that you don't necessarily control. But what you do control is how you react and act on those situations, right? So I think that it's very appropriate to, when you get faced with a situation, let yourself feel your emotions, right? And because otherwise you're going to suppress them, and it's not going to end up very well for you. So that's not necessarily part of Stoicism, but I think it's important, and I think it is an important thing to remember when practicing Stoicism, to not suppress negative emotions, to not use your control of your actions to tell yourself that you should not feel this way, but instead recognize that you feel this way and let yourself feel that way. And then if you need, or you feel like you need empathy, reach out. If you're not able to get it from somebody else, which is something you can't control, you at least can empathize with yourself. So at least trying to do that. And I guess that would be what I would encourage people to do.
Yeah, me too. And in fact, I propose upgrading Stoicism with a little bit of understanding, psychological understanding, and version 2.0 perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be much better and much more useful, much more well-rounded. I would say that actually I'm sure that many people who practice Stoicism, whether they know that it is or that they know that it's actually Stoicism or not, many people who follow these practices will fall into this trap. And what is missing here, and this comes from Nathaniel Branden's Psychology of Self-Esteem, his first book on the subject, is his definition of emotions. And I will tell it in a second, but the moment you understand his definition of emotions, you realize that you can't control your emotions. And I think I'm not sure, but I think even you have said during this talk that part of Stoicism is controlling your emotions. I think maybe it probably wasn't something that you would agree with, but I think you actually said it, and I think it's a popular thing to control your emotions or to focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
But his definition is that, if I remember correctly, or what I got from it, is that your emotions are a reaction, an automatic reaction to the things happening around you, and they're telling you, basically it's a judgment of, is this for me or is this against me? And if this definition is correct, and I think it is, then emotions are not within your sphere of control. So to really implement it into Stoicism, so if you are stoical and have a psychological understanding, you will not try to control your emotions because it is not within your sphere of control. It's like fate. It doesn't mean that you are, and I think you understand this, but I want to clarify, it doesn't mean that you blindly follow whatever happens in you, but you have to accept your emotions at least. And you can control your actions, which is what Stoicism does say, but you cannot control your emotions. You can either accept them and embrace them as a fact of reality that you can decide how much it influences you big picture, but it is something that's out there or in there. Or you can suppress them, and if you suppress them, as you said, it's gonna come back more powerfully. So that would be my upgrade. That's what I would suggest with my limited understanding.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree. I think that's very true. And I think that it should be recognized, especially when talking about Stoicism. And I do hope that I recognize that at least most of the time when I speak on it, because I think you're very right that it's very important, and it definitely should be added to the practice of Stoicism.
Right. And I will say that also my experience too, so the things that I talked about in my family, those were more childhood things, but as I was moving into my teenage years, I kind of came up with my own version of Stoicism, and sphere of control was part of it, but also part of it was trying to control my own emotions. And in kind of a shaming way, as you said, and it did not work. It led to basically a cycle of times when I felt nothing and I achieved my ideal, but then it would break down, and then I would be overwhelmed by sadness, by anger, and I would break the things that I've achieved, or I would become really depressed, and it just didn't work. And both phases were really bad. I don't want to curse on this on the podcast, so I can maintain the clean rating, but I would if I could. Both phases were bad, because when I was suppressing the emotions, that's not a fun place to be. It's not being completely neutral, which is the aim of many philosophies, is a terrible place to be in. That's I don't like it. I don't know what your opinion is, but having no emotion is a very, very unrealistic goal long term, but in the moment it's a very poor life, I would say.
Yeah, I absolutely would agree.
And another reason for embracing emotion, and this is why I think logic and emotion can be very well integrated, is that in analyzing it, it can often give you knowledge picked up by your unconscious that you're blocking out, and it can carry some information that you don't want to suppress, and that's going to really improve your life. So you're not fully logical. You can't be fully rational because you're missing certain cues. And even if it seems like disproportional or irrational reaction to what's happening in the moment, well, in that case, it points to something in your history. This is what I got from my own therapy and from psychology, that these reactions have a root. So there's either it's giving you valid information about the present that you're blocking out. So for instance, if you're feeling constantly irritated around someone, but you don't really understand the root, digging deep in there might uncover things that you know unconsciously about the person, but that you didn't process for some reasons. And if not, it can point to things in your past that you definitely want to uncover. So that's my that's my pitch for listening to your emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think you spelled it out perfectly. I think it's very valuable, and I think that it's a skill that many people don't have. And I think it's emotions are an area of our lives that many people overlook, especially men, right? That's, at least in my experience, is what I found, is that women are a little bit more emotionally intelligent, but actually still not very. I don't think very many people are in touch with those emotions, and I would like to think that I am, in touch with them to an extent, but I still do think that I have a lot of room to improve, and I think that it's definitely an area that is of great interest to me, and I think that it's very important when you're trying to, because there's emotions are not something that you can control, right? What we're talking about, what you said, it's exactly right, and they're not going anywhere. They're staying. And we can discuss on how we obtained emotions and what function they serve, but in my opinion, right, is that we adapted and evolved to obtain these, and that they are part of our biological function that will not cease to exist for at least a very long time. And I don't really want to see them go missing. I know somebody, and I'm part of it. And another philosophical thing that I explore, ego utilitarianism, very interesting, but that's an entire different conversation. But the guy who talks about it kind of came up with this idea, this philosophy. He's very anti-emotion, and it's kind of weird to see him do that. But one thing he will admit is that he has not overcome emotion, and I'm not sure that he ever will. I don't think that he'll ever will, and I am very doubtful that I ever will, and partly because I'm not going to try. But even if you do try, I think that you're going to have a lot of issues, and I can tell from this person that there are many emotional things that he has not explored and that do not serve to his benefit. So I guess in a long way, I'm saying you're exactly right. I think that people should explore emotions because they're not going anywhere. They're going to stick with you. And if you want to live a joyful life, and you want to have some inner peace, and therefore, and that will contribute to a lot of beneficial things in a lot of areas in your life, that you're going to have a much better time if you have a good understanding of what is going on inside of you, and emotions is a big part of that.
Yeah, and we're moving into very dangerous territory just because I love this topic so much. But yeah, I think it's a false dichotomy, and you can listen to. I mean, I'm talking to the listener here. I don't know if you've listened to it, Nick, but you can listen to Jake DeSillas's of The Voluntary Life. He has a series on. I think it's part 5 of the series, but it slips my mind what the name of the series is. I will link to it. It's Reason. It's a series on reason, and in part 5 he lays out this his arguments for why logic and rationality are not antithetical to emotions, but in fact, logic without emotions is illogical. And I would also add, like, I don't know this person that you're talking of, but getting rid of emotion sounds to me, as I reconnect to more and more of my emotions, a terrible goal. I don't even know why someone would want to get there. I mean, rationally, not. I think it can be a reaction to emotions being a source of pain, so you abandon them. But they are the salt and pepper of life. They are biologically there because they are our motivation. I very genuinely believe that without emotion, we would not get out of bed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're exactly right. And his point is that they are ineffective I mean, they served some, his point is that they served some biological function, but now that we have reasoning skills and logic, we don't need them to benefit our lives. But I do not understand why that is a goal to look forward to, and I definitely don't share that with him.
Right. So that was my criticism of Stoicism. That was really important to me. But I think we're on the same page then.
Yeah, good.
Good. You have some episodes on Stoicism, and we'll link to that. But what is your podcast, Nick? Where can people find?
Yeah, I run and co-host, or not co-host, I host the Anarcho-Yakitalism podcast, and you can find that on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, the Liberty Radio Network at lrn.fm, and an-yak.com. That's an-yak.com. That's where it is hosted. And I don't remember any of the numbers on Stoicism except episode 57. I always recommend episode 57. That's a very emotional episode for me, but I also touch on Stoicism quite a bit on that, and I talk about how that really affected my life in a major way. We touched on that today, but that gets into the more of the specifics of that situation for me, and I would definitely recommend that to people.
Yeah, and I will say that when in preparation for this interview or this talk, I simply went to your site and I put Stoicism into the search bar, and the 3 or 4 episodes, maybe you have more, but 3 or 4 episodes definitely showed up, and they were all a good listen. So that's a good place to begin. Anything else that you do, Nick, that you'd like to advertise?
Yeah, sure. I don't know when you're putting this out, Philip, but next week I will be in New Hampshire at the Porcupine Freedom Festival, speaking on libertarianism and agriculture. Yaks and Hogs, the Road to Freedom is what my talk is called. I will be there on Saturday. You can find me at the Building Communities tent on Saturday at 6:30 p.m. I'll be going from 6:30 to 8. Be a long talk. It'll be very fun and interesting. I'll include a lot of questions. So if you are going to be at PorcFest, or if you're going to be in New Hampshire, try to make it there in Lancaster at Rogers Campground, Porcupine Freedom Festival, 6:30 to 8 p.m. That's where I will be. That is the one thing that I think I will plug.
Cool. That's great. And it will come. Dear listener, this is valid. This is really next week because I'm putting this out pretty fast. So check Nick out at PorcFest.